The achievement of the Conservative Party is obviously remarkable. The Conservative Party is the most successful political party anywhere in the world. The only competitor for that title would be the Communist Party, which isn't a real political party anyway, because it doesn't accept political pluralism. Why was the Conservative Party so successful? Well, one of the main reasons, of course, was that its leaders made a series of enormous blunders, and the Conservatives were sensible and wise and shrewd enough to take advantage of them. It was also, though, the fact that the Conservative Party was, for most, though not all the time, extremely well led. Now, this brings me to the approach that I took to this large but highly readable book. I could have concentrated, of course, on matters of organisation. And organisation is important, and particularly the money that the Conservative Party was able to raise, much more than other parties, was important in ensuring a good organisation. I could have concentrated on policies, but in fact policies haven't really been central to the Conservative Party's claim to be the natural party of government, and I think only really in the 1980s was policy central to the Conservative Party's claim to be that. I could have concentrated on ideas, and there is such a thing as conservatism, and I'm interested in ideas, and a number of you are certainly too, but in the history of the Conservative Party as a whole, ideas have largely been treated instrumentally. They have either been useful or useless in the aim of gaining power. And so therefore I don't think any of those approaches would really be the best one to pursue. So I chose the leaders. Now, this has several advantages. First of all, biography is always more fun. And secondly, in the Conservative Party, the position of the leader is quite different than in other parties. The Conservative Party is accurately described as an elective dictatorship. At least it's been elective since the 1960s. But of course, one of the disadvantages of being a dictator, or shall we say an absolute ruler to be more precise, is that you are held, of course, to blame for almost everything that happens. And so the position of Conservative leaders is at one time extremely strong, but at the other time particularly fragile. You never know when the carpet is going to be pulled away from you. Or to change the metaphor, the Conservative Party is hungry for power, hungry for success, and if you as Conservative leader stand in the way of power and do not deliver success, the Conservative Party's next meal will be you. So, different techniques of party leadership. The party, despite being generally obedient, sometimes sullenly so, but generally obedient, needs to be managed. And you have to have some kind of sympathy, or at least affect some kind of sympathy for your backbenchers and your supporters if you are successfully to manage it. And this doesn't mean necessarily that you are a good Prime Minister. And I take as my example of this, I could have taken two possible examples. One is Edward Heath and one is Peel. Now, I don't think anybody would claim that Edward Heath was a successful leader, but since in my mind he certainly wasn't a successful Prime Minister either, I shall just push him aside. But Robert Peel was a great Prime Minister and a great statesman, very much in the Victorian mould. The trouble was that he was an extremely bad politician. It was Peel, by being moderate and respectable, who got the Conservatives back to power in 1841, but it was Peel then by being pig-headed and big-headed who got them out again, splitting the party disastrously, keeping it out of power for decades after 1946 and the row over the Corn Laws. And I want to just quote from something that Peel said, because I think that it gives you a feel of what Conservative leaders can get to be like. They're not all of them quite to the extent of Peel, or might I add, Heath. Peel wrote, just after leaving office, "So far from regretting the expulsion from office, I rejoice in it as the greatest relief from an intolerable burden. To have to incur the deepest responsibility and to be at the same time the tool of a party, that is to say, to adopt the opinions of men who have not access to your knowledge and could not profit from it." who spend their time eating and drinking and hunting, shooting, gambling, horse racing, and so forth, would be odious servitude, to which I never will submit. I intend to keep aloof from party combinations. Well, that is one way to lose your leadership, gentlemen. However, there are other ways. You can also fail to lead, in the sense you fail in times of crisis and when great issues need to be addressed. You can fail to give the leadership that is required. You can fail to set direction. In my view, I would say that this was what John Major failed as leader over Europe by doing, but I'm not going to get onto that. Instead, I'm going to talk about Arthur Balfour. And Balfour, a very intelligent man, and an extremely silly one, led the Conservative Party to one of its great historic crashes in 1906. Now, the reason that this happened, there were various background reasons, but it was mainly through the mishandling of the issue of protection, which is not completely dissimilar from the issue of Europe today, incidentally, and there are many parallels. But Balfour really tried to be too clever, and again I'm going to quote, but not this time from Balfour. The background to this quotation is that in the House of Commons, Balfour had tried to avoid coming down on one side or the other, I can almost hear the parallels now, on this matter that mattered so much and so passionately to Conservative backbenchers. And he'd said that he had no settled convictions on the tariff question. Well, a Liberal Member of Parliament, Sir Wilfrid Lawson, composed this commentary on the matter. It runs, "I'm not for free trade, and I'm not for protection. I approve of them both, and to both have objection. In going through life, I continually find it's a terrible business to make up one's mind. And it's always the best in political fray to take up the line of the Vicar of Bray. So in spite of all comments, reproach and predictions, I firmly adhere to unsettled convictions." Well, out went Balfour. So you have to get the politics right, but of course, at a more serious level, you have to get the policies right. And here there is, I think, again, a distinction to be made between the different successful leaders. You can say that Baldwin was a successful leader. He had two big election victories, enormous victory in 1924, and again, as head of the coalition in 1935. You can similarly say the same of Macmillan, another fixer, greatly admired by our present Prime Minister, who gained in 1959 a 100-vote majority, and clearly managed to finesse the economy to go along with the electoral cycle, and was very clever in doing that. But the trouble was that neither Baldwin nor Macmillan really addressed the problems which stemmed from the decline at home and abroad of Britain. And as a result of that, their successes were ephemeral rather than enduring. And I do think, I suppose you would say, I would say this, wouldn't I, but well, I do say it, that Mrs. Thatcher is actually the only Conservative leader who has consistently and courageously tried to reverse Britain's decline and, economically speaking at least, succeeded. Now, this is really quite remarkable because, you know, the Conservatives and the Conservative leaders have not generally been very good at economics at all. It's just that the Labour Party was so much worse that we forget about it. So, well, there are other things in politics that have to be done, and one of them, of course, is something that confronts the leadership at the moment, and that is managing a coalition. Now, the Conservative Party has, in fact, done quite well in coalitions. Lord Salisbury, who I rate with Mrs. Thatcher as one of the two greatest leaders and greatest prime ministers, Lord Salisbury constructed the great Unionist coalition in the mid-1880s, using the failures of Gladstone over Home Rule. He split his opponents, he smashed his opponents, and he drew many of them over to him to form what was effectively a new or at least enlarged Conservative Party. And then he managed this coalition extremely well. Now, this was not easy, and it was not likely. It was not easy because, of course, these were big people he had to deal with, and it wasn't likely because Salisbury was not temperamentally the sort of person to manage anybody. He was an austere, fastidious, single-minded, strong-willed aristocrat. And these people do not generally like to be messed around. But, in fact, he did manage these people very successfully, and he kept his own supporters on side. because all of the time that he made any concessions, his own supporters believed that his heart was in the right place, and I mean right place. Now that is an approach to Conservative leadership, and I think it's a good approach even of Conservative leadership of a coalition. And what does one want to avoid as regards Conservative leadership of a coalition? Well, here one has to point to the unfortunate example of Austin Chamberlain and 1922. Now, Austin Chamberlain was an honourable and inadequate man. F.E. Smith, who was neither honourable nor inadequate, said of Austin that he always played the game and always lost it. Well, Austin certainly lost it big time in 1922, when in October of that year, at the famous Carlton Club meeting, the Conservative Party turned on him and tore him to shreds. It was the only time that this has ever happened, and he left the role effectively, no longer as leader. And how did this happen? Well, Austin was, as I say, an honourable and rather stupid man, but he had, I think, a strange mixture of confidence and lack of confidence. He lacked confidence in the Conservative Party. He didn't believe that the Conservative Party, unless it actually was on the coattails of Lloyd George, could ever win an election. He just couldn't believe it. And yet, of course, his backbenchers and the people in the country hated Lloyd George, absolutely hated him. And at the same time, Austin Chamberlain, had a great deal of confidence in himself, because he thought he was indispensable. And this really is a piece of advice I would have thought for every leader of the Conservative Party. Never, ever believe that you are indispensable. Well, Austin was rudely disillusioned. And are there any parallels today? Well, I think there are a few, but not particularly direct, but there are a few. The differences are obvious, and that is that the present coalition is led by a Conservative and not by a Liberal. Another is that the Liberal that we Conservatives have to deal with is Nick Clegg, and the Liberal that they, in those days, had to deal with was Lloyd George. Now, Lloyd George was a thoroughly obnoxious figure, but a very dangerous man. Now, Nick Clegg may be a rather irritating figure, but has absolutely no substance at all. So nobody is going to fear whatever Nick Clegg says or does. So obviously that's a large difference. But I suppose the common factor would be that it can happen that a small group who constitute in their own minds the indispensable leadership of the party might think that they are indispensable, as Austin Chamberlain thought, and therefore that they could force the party into going into another election on a common slate with another party, in this case, of course, the Liberal Democrats. Well, all I would say is that history teaches few lessons, but it does surely teach the lesson that one shouldn't make a fool of oneself twice. Anyway, on that happy note, without I'm sure ever having trodden at all beyond the impartiality that is required of a historian, I would certainly invite you to buy this book, and I hope also that you enjoy it.
Thank you very much.